I never thought I'd become the guy who bought his HOA president's house just to get revenge. But when Karen Fitzgerald showed up at my door for the third time in a week, brandishing her clipboard like a weapon, something inside me snapped. It started on a Tuesday morning in May, when I was enjoying my coffee on the back porch of my house in Meadowbrook, Colorado, a quiet suburb 20 minutes outside Denver. I had just finished building a small storage shed in my backyard. Nothing fancy, just an 8 by 10 structure where I could keep my lawnmower, garden tools, and camping equipment. I had painted it a nice forest green that matched the pine trees surrounding our neighborhood. I thought it looked great. Apparently, Karen Fitzgerald, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, had other ideas. The doorbell rang at exactly 8 in the morning, which should have been my first warning. Normal people don't make house calls that early unless it's an emergency. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-50s with an aggressively angled bob haircut, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, and a white pantsuit that looked like it cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Good morning," she said, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "I'm Karen Fitzgerald, HOA president. We need to discuss your shed." I blinked at her, still holding my coffee mug. "My shed?" "Yes, your shed." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo she had apparently taken of my backyard. According to Section 14, subsection C of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws, all outdoor structures must be painted in approved neutral colors. Forest green is not on the approved list. "I wasn't aware there was an approved list," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "No one mentioned anything when I submitted my shed application 2 months ago. Ignorance of the rules is not an excuse, mister." She paused, waiting for my name. "Sam Irvine," I said. "Mr. Irvine. The approved colors are beige, tan, light brown, cream, or off-white. You have 14 days to repaint your shed or face daily fines of $50. $50 a day. That's what the bylaws state. Have a good day, Mr. Irvine." She turned on her heel and walked back to her white Lexus SUV parked in my driveway. I stood there for a moment, contemplating whether I had just imagined that entire interaction. When I bought my house in Meadowbrook Hills 3 years ago, I had skimmed the HOA documents like everyone does, meaning I basically ignored them. I was a software developer who worked from home, kept my lawn maintained, and didn't cause trouble. I thought that would be enough. Apparently, I was wrong. I spent that afternoon digging through the 70-page HOA bylaws document that had been buried in my email. Sure enough, there it was, Section 14, subsection C. The approved color list included 8 different shades that all basically looked like variations of boring. But what caught my attention was Section 14, subsection D, which stated that any homeowner could petition for an exception by submitting a written request to the HOA board. I drafted a polite email explaining that forest green complemented the natural surroundings and requested an exception. I sent it to the HOA board email address listed in the documents. 2 days later, Karen showed up again. This time she was wearing a beige dress that matched her personality. "Mr. Irvine, your petition for exception has been reviewed and denied." "Already? I just sent it 2 days ago." "I am the HOA president. I have the authority to deny requests that clearly violate our community standards. But it says I can petition the board. Don't they need to vote?" I made the executive decision. "You now have 12 days remaining. I suggest you purchase paint soon. I recommend the beige from Sherman-Williams, color number 6106. It's what most residents use." She handed me a paint chip, turned around, and left again. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my older brother, Marcus, who was a real estate attorney in Chicago. After explaining the situation, he laughed so hard I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Sam, buddy, welcome to HOA hell. I've dealt with hundreds of these cases. The thing about HOA presidents is they think they're running a small kingdom. Can she actually do this? Just deny my petition without a board vote. Depends on what the governing documents say. Email them to me, I'll take a look." I sent him everything. He called me back an hour later, and this time he wasn't laughing. "Sam, your HOA bylaws are actually pretty standard, but there are some interesting things here. First, yes, she can make executive decisions, but only for routine matters. Denying a petition should go to the full board. Second, and this is the interesting part, there's a clause in here about board elections. They're supposed to happen annually in September. According to these documents, Karen has been president for 6 years. Is that normal? It's legal if she keeps getting elected, but here's the thing. The bylaws require at least 2 candidates for each board position. I'm willing to bet she's been running unopposed. You know what that means? What? Anyone can run against her. You've got about 4 months until the next election. I thanked Marcus and hung up, but I wasn't thinking about elections. I was thinking about that paint chip Karen had handed me. Something about her absolute certainty that I would comply bothered me more than the stupid rule itself. The next morning, I drove to Sherman-Williams and bought 2 gallons of the exact beige she had recommended. Then I painted my shed. It took me a full Saturday, and when I was done, my beautiful forest green shed looked like a boring box that blended into nothing. But I had complied. I thought that would be the end of it. Monday morning, Karen appeared again. I was starting to wonder if she had nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. "Mr. Irvine, we need to talk about your mailbox." "My mailbox, it's faded." "All mailboxes must be maintained in pristine condition. You need to repaint it or replace it within 7 days. I looked at my mailbox. Sure, it was slightly faded from sun exposure, but it was perfectly functional and not an eyesore. "Karen, I just painted my shed. Can we maybe space these things out? The rules don't have a spacing provision, Mr. Irvine. 7 days. She handed me another violation notice and left. That's when I started paying attention to the neighborhood, really paying attention. Over the next few days, I walked around Meadowbrook Hills with fresh eyes. I noticed that at least a dozen houses had minor violations according to the bylaws. Mrs. Patterson on Oak Street had flower pots on her porch that were red, not the approved terracotta. The Johnsons on Maple Drive had a basketball hoop in their driveway, which technically violated the recreational equipment clause. The Richardsons had a doormat with a funny saying that could be considered inappropriate under the community standards section. But none of them had violation notices on their doors. I started asking around. I chatted with Mrs. Patterson while she was gardening. Turned out she had been friends with Karen for years. The Johnsons. Their son was in the same yoga class as Karen. The Richardsons had helped Karen organize a community yard sale last year. I, on the other hand, was relatively new and had never attended HOA meetings or community events. I was the perfect target. I repainted my mailbox. Then Karen cited me for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though I had just brought them in from the curb, and they were sitting there for maybe 20 minutes. Then, it was my house numbers needing to be larger. Then my porch light being the wrong color temperature. By early June, I had received 8 violation notices in 3 weeks. I had paid over $400 in fines because some violations I couldn't fix fast enough to avoid the daily penalty. I started documenting everything, taking photos, keeping every notice, saving every email. One evening, after receiving my 9th violation notice for having a package visible on my porch for more than 24 hours, I had enough. I called Marcus again. "She's harassing you," he said flatly. "This is targeted enforcement, which could be considered harassment under Colorado law. You could sue the HOA. How long would that take? Year, maybe 2. Legal fees would be substantial. What if I just ran for HOA president and beat her?" "You could try, but she's been president for 6 years. That means she's probably got enough supporters to keep winning." I thanked him and sat on my porch, looking at my beige shed, my freshly painted mailbox, and my perfectly maintained but apparently never good enough house. That's when I saw Karen drive by slowly, looking at houses, probably searching for her next victim. Then I had an idea. A ridiculous, possibly insane idea. I called my friend Derek, who was a real estate agent in Denver. "Derek, hypothetically, how hard would it be to find out if someone's house is for sale or might be for sale soon?" "Not hard at all." "Whose house?" "Karen Fitzgerald, 1247 Meadowbrook Circle." "Your HOA president, dude, what are you planning?" "Just curious." "Can you look?" He called me back 20 minutes later. "Sam, you're not going to believe this. Her house isn't listed, but she's been making calls to agents. My colleague mentioned that Karen Fitzgerald contacted her last week asking about property values in Meadowbrook Hills. Apparently, her husband got a job transfer to Phoenix, and they're planning to sell soon." My heart started beating faster. "How soon?" "Probably within the next month. She's trying to get a sense of the market first. If she lists it, I want to know immediately." "Sam, what are you doing?" "Something either really smart or really stupid. I'll let you know which." I spent the next week researching everything I could about Karen's house. It was one of the larger homes in the neighborhood, a 4-bedroom, 3-bath colonial-style house with a big backyard. She and her husband, whose name was Richard, had lived there for 8 years. Through social media and public records, I learned that Richard was a regional manager for a pharmaceutical company and had indeed been offered a position in Phoenix. I also looked at my own finances. As a software developer, I made good money, and I had been saving for years with no particular goal in mind. I had excellent credit and enough for a substantial down payment on a second property. But buying a house just to spite your HOA president was possibly the dumbest financial decision a person could make. Then again, principle sometimes matters more than practicality. Derek called me on June 15th. "Sam, it's listed. Just went active this morning. She's asking $420,000. Is that fair market value? Maybe slightly high. Comparable houses in the area have been selling around $390 to $410. I want to make an offer." "Sam, are you serious?" "Completely. Can you represent me?" "This is crazy, but yes." "How much are you offering?" I thought about it. If I offered asking price, she might accept immediately. If I offered too much, she'd know something was up. $415,000 cash offer, 30-day close. That's aggressive. She'll probably take it. Good, draw up the papers. The offer was submitted that afternoon. I used an LLC that Derek helped me set up quickly so my name wouldn't appear on the initial paperwork. 24 hours later, Karen accepted the offer. I guess the combination of above asking price, cash, and quick close was too good to refuse. For the next month, I played it cool. I continued fixing every violation Karen sent my way, which now included my garden hose being visible from the street and my grass being 1/4 inch too tall according to her measurements. I paid the fines. I followed every ridiculous rule. I waited. The closing was scheduled for July 20th. Derek met me at the title company in Denver. Karen and Richard were there with their agent. When I walked in, Karen's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, and finally horror. "What are you doing here?" she demanded. "Buying your house," I said pleasantly. "Thank you for accepting my offer." "You're the buyer." No, I'm not selling to you." "Richard, tell them we're not selling." Richard looked confused. "Karen, we already accepted the offer. We're under contract. We can't just back out." "I don't care. This is my house and I'm not selling it to him." The title officer, a patient woman named Gloria, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Fitzgerald, if you refuse to close, the buyer can sue you for specific performance and you'll still have to sell. Plus you'll be liable for any damages. The earnest money deposit has already been submitted." Karen looked like she wanted to explode. Her face turned red and her hands shook as she clutched her purse. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you've made my life miserable for 2 months over paint colors and mailboxes," I said calmly. "And I'm tired of it. Now, can we please proceed with closing? I have plans for the house." The closing took 2 hours. Karen signed every document with barely controlled fury, her pen practically stabbing through the paper. Richard looked embarrassed and apologized to me quietly at one point, saying his wife had been under a lot of stress with the move. When it was done, I was the owner of 1247 Meadowbrook Circle. Karen and Richard had 30 days to move out per the agreement, which meant they'd be gone by mid-August. That night, I started planning. I researched paint colors. Not beige, not tan, not any of the boring approved colors on the HOA list. I wanted something that would make a statement. After hours of looking at color swatches, I found it. Neon pink. Specifically, a shade called Flamingo Sunset that was so bright it practically glowed. But I had to be smart about this. If I painted the house while Karen still lived there, she could potentially cause problems during the moving process. So I waited. The month of Karen living in a house I owned while still serving as HOA president was deliciously awkward. She avoided me completely, which meant I finally had a break from violation notices. I actually got to enjoy my home for the first time in months. I saw moving trucks at her house on August 12th. Derek had mentioned that Karen and Richard had bought a house in Scottsdale, Arizona, and were eager to start their new life. I watched from my window as they loaded up their belongings. Karen caught me watching at one point and gave me a look of pure hatred. 2 days after they left, I had the painters scheduled. I had hired a company called Bright Future Painting, and I showed them exactly what I wanted. The owner, a guy named Tommy, looked at the color choice and whistled. "Man, that's bold. You sure about this?" "Never been more sure of anything in my life. Your HOA is going to have a field day with this. I'm counting on it." The painting took 3 days. They did 2 coats to make sure the color was vivid and even. When they finished on August 17th, 1247 Meadowbrook Circle looked like a giant flamingo had merged with a house. It was visible from 3 streets away. It was magnificent. I took photos from every angle as the afternoon sun hit it. The color seemed to intensify in natural light. It was so bright that I actually needed sunglasses to look at it directly. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. First it was Mrs. Patterson, asking if I knew what had happened to Karen's house. Then it was the Johnsons. Then people I didn't even know started calling, having gotten my number from the neighborhood directory. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA. But it wasn't from Karen anymore. It was from the vice president, a man named Gerald Morrison, who I had never met. "Dear Mr. Irvine, it has come to our attention that the property located at 1247 Meadowbrook Circle, which records show you recently purchased, has been painted in a color that violates HOA Bylaws Section 14, subsection C. You have 14 days to repaint the property in an approved color or face fines of $100 per day. I smiled and started typing my response. Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for your email. I have reviewed Section 14, subsection C carefully. I note that this section applies to outdoor structures, which is defined in Section 2, subsection, as any structure not constituting the primary residence, including but not limited to sheds, gazebos, detached garages, and storage buildings. As 1247 Meadowbrook Circle is a primary residence, Section 14, subsection C does not apply. I'm sure this was simply an oversight on your part. Please let me know if you have any questions. I hit send and waited. The response came 4 hours later. Mr. Irvine, while you are technically correct that Section 14, subsection C specifies outdoor structures, Section 12, subsection B requires all homes to maintain aesthetic harmony with the neighborhood. Your bright pink house violates this principle. I had anticipated this. I had spent the last month becoming an expert in the Meadowbrook Hills HOA bylaws, and I had found every loophole, every contradiction, and every vague provision that could work in my favor. Mr. Morrison, Section 12, subsection B states that homes must maintain reasonable aesthetic harmony with the neighborhood. Reasonable is not defined in the bylaws, making this provision subjective and unenforceable under Colorado common law regarding HOA regulations. Furthermore, Section 12, subsection B is in conflict with Section 3, subsection F, which protects homeowners' rights to make alterations to their primary residence that do not impact structural integrity or safety. Painting falls under protected alterations. I'm confident that if this matter were brought to court, the judge would find in my favor. The emails stopped for 2 days. I knew they were probably consulting with their HOA attorney. I used that time to make sure everything else about both of my properties was in perfect compliance. My grass was exactly 2.5 inches tall. My mailbox was pristine. My trash cans were hidden. My shed was the most boring beige structure in Colorado. I wasn't going to give them any other ammunition. On August 22nd, I received a certified letter from the HOA's law firm, Daniels and Associates, based in Denver. They were demanding I repaint the house within 30 days, or they would pursue legal action. The letter cited various sections of the bylaws and claimed that my interpretation was incorrect. I forwarded everything to Marcus, who had been following this situation with a mixture of amusement and professional concern. Sam, they're going to sue you. You know that, right? Let them. Discovery will be fun. I want to see every email Karen sent about me, every decision she made, and every other homeowner she's cited over the years. I think we'll find some interesting patterns. You're enjoying this. Is that wrong? Probably. But I'll represent you if it goes to court. Family discount. The lawsuit was filed in September in Boulder County District Court. The Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association versus Samuel Irvine. They were seeking an injunction to force me to repaint the house and compensatory damages for decreased property values in the neighborhood. Marcus filed our response, which included a countersuit for selective enforcement, harassment, and emotional distress. We submitted all the violation notices I had received, photos showing other homes with similar violations that hadn't been cited, and a detailed timeline of Karen's harassment campaign against me. We also subpoenaed HOA records going back 5 years. What we found was enlightening. Karen had issued over 300 violation notices during her tenure as president. Of those, 250 were concentrated on just 15 homeowners. The other residents, many of whom were her friends or social connections, had received far fewer citations for similar or worse violations. We found emails where Karen discussed targeting certain homeowners to encourage them to maintain standards, or to remind them who sets the rules around here. We found evidence that she had denied legitimate exception requests without consulting the board, as I had suspected. The case went to mediation in October. The HOA's attorney, a stern woman named Patricia Daniels, came in confident but left looking shaken after Marcus presented our evidence. "Your client has been running this HOA like a personal fiefdom," Marcus said during the mediation. "She selectively enforced rules, harassed homeowners she personally disliked, and abused her authority. If this goes to trial, we're not just going after the HOA. We're going after Karen Fitzgerald personally for harassment and abusive process." Patricia requested a recess to consult with her clients. When she came back, she made an offer. The HOA will drop all claims regarding the house color if Mr. Irvine agrees not to pursue his countersuit. "Not good enough," Marcus said. "Here's what we want. The HOA drops all claims. Karen Fitzgerald resigns from any HOA position immediately, though I understand she's already moved. The HOA revises its bylaws to include clear definitions of terms like reasonable aesthetic harmony and implements an appeals process for homeowner decisions. And the HOA pays $50,000 to Mr. Irvine for the harassment he endured, plus his legal fees. That's outrageous. Then we'll see you in court. Discovery is going to be extensive, and I promise you, by the time we're done, every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills is going to know exactly how their HOA president operated. Some of them might have their own lawsuits." Patricia called a recess again. This time it lasted 2 hours. When she returned, they had a counteroffer. Drop all claims, revise the bylaws, pay $25,000 plus legal fees, and Karen would sign an agreement never to hold any HOA position in any community again. I accepted. The agreement was signed on October 28th. The story could have ended there, but it didn't. Because while all the legal stuff was happening, something else was developing in Meadowbrook Hills. The September HOA election that Marcus had mentioned came around. Gerald Morrison, the vice president who had sent me those initial emails, decided to run for president. He was running on a platform of restoring order and traditional values to the neighborhood, which everyone knew was code for getting rid of the pink house. A woman named Linda Sorensen, who lived on Maple Drive, also decided to run. Linda was a retired teacher who had lived in Meadowbrook Hills for 12 years and had watched Karen's increasingly authoritarian rule with growing concern. When she found out about my situation, she reached out to me. "Sam, I've been wanting to challenge Karen for years, but I never had the courage. What you did, buying her house and painting it pink, that was brilliant. It woke people up. They're seeing now what some of us have known for years. This HOA has been a dictatorship, not a community organization." Linda and I met at a coffee shop in Denver, and she explained her platform. Reasonable enforcement of rules that actually mattered, community involvement in major decisions, and treating homeowners with respect rather than suspicion. "I need your help," she said. "I need you to come to the election meeting and tell your story. A lot of people think you're just being difficult. They need to understand what really happened." The election meeting was held on September 15th in the community center. I hadn't attended an HOA meeting since I moved in 3 years ago, and I was nervous. The room was packed with at least 80 people, which apparently was a record turnout. People were curious about the pink house and the lawsuit. Gerald Morrison spoke first. He was in his early 60s, retired military, and he had that authoritative tone that some people found comforting and others found intimidating. For 8 years, our community has maintained standards that kept property values high and our neighborhood beautiful, he began. Recently, those standards have been challenged by someone who thinks his personal preferences matter more than community harmony. If elected president, I will enforce our rules consistently and ensure that Meadowbrook Hills remains a place we can all be proud of. Subtle, but everyone knew he was talking about me and my pink house. Linda spoke next. She was warm, genuine, and spoke about community rather than rules. I've lived here for 12 years, and I've loved this neighborhood. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being a community and became subjects of a rule book. Yes, we need standards. Yes, we need maintenance. But we also need common sense, fairness, and the understanding that people's homes are their biggest investments and their personal spaces. We need leadership that serves the community, not the other way around. Then it was time for questions. A man in the back raised his hand immediately. This question is for whoever wants to answer it. What about the pink house? Should we allow that? Gerald jumped in. Absolutely not. It's a violation of everything we stand for. Linda looked at me and I stood up. I hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly I needed to. Hi, I'm Sam Irvine. I own the pink house. I'd like to explain how that happened. I told them everything. I told them about the forest green shed and the first violation notice. I told them about the 8 subsequent violations in 3 weeks, the fines, the targeting. I told them how I discovered that other homeowners with similar violations weren't being cited because they were Karen's friends. I told them about buying her house. I painted it pink because I was angry, I said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but here's the thing. In the 6 months I've lived here before Karen started targeting me, do you know how many times I was late with my HOA dues? 0. Do you know how many complaints I received from neighbors about noise, parking, or any legitimate disturbance? 0. I maintain my property. I follow reasonable rules, but I was being harassed because I was an easy target and because Karen could. I pulled out my phone and showed photos on the community center's screen. This is Mrs. Patterson's porch with red flower pots. Against the rules, but no violation. This is the Johnsons' basketball hoop. Against the rules, no violation. This is my original forest green shed, which actually complemented the natural surroundings but wasn't on the approved beige list. Violation, fine, forced to repaint. The room was silent. I'm not asking you to like my pink house. I know it's ridiculous. But I'm asking you to think about what kind of community you want to live in. Do you want leadership that enforces rules fairly and reasonably? Or do you want leadership that uses rules as weapons against people they don't like? I sat down. The room erupted in whispered conversations. People were looking at each other, at their phones, at the photos I had shown. An older woman stood up. I recognized her as Helen Carter, who lived 2 streets over. I received 4 violation notices last year, she said quietly. My house numbers were fading. My mailbox had a small dent. My lawn had some brown patches during the drought. I'm on a fixed income and those fines added up quickly. I paid them because I didn't know what else to do. I thought I was the only one being targeted, so I was too embarrassed to say anything. Another person stood up, then another. 5 more homeowners shared similar stories of excessive violations, seemingly arbitrary enforcement, and fear of retribution if they complained. Gerald Morrison looked increasingly uncomfortable. Linda Sorensen looked vindicated. The vote was held at the end of the meeting. Linda Sorensen won with 62% of the vote. Gerald got 31%. The remaining 7% wrote in other names, including 3 people who wrote in my name, which I found both flattering and amusing. Linda's first act as president was to form a committee to review the bylaws and recommend changes. I was asked to serve on that committee, along with 4 other homeowners and a lawyer who specialized in HOA regulations. Over the next 2 months, we worked on revising the bylaws. We kept the important rules about property maintenance, noise ordinances, and legitimate safety concerns. But we eliminated or revised the ridiculous ones. The approved paint color list was expanded to include a much wider range of options, though we did add a provision that extremely bright or neon colors required board approval for primary residences. I appreciated the irony that my pink house was essentially grandfathered in because it existed before the new rule. We also added provisions for a formal appeals process, defined vague terms like reasonable aesthetic harmony, and created limits on violation notices to prevent harassment. No homeowner could receive more than 2 violation notices per month unless there was an immediate safety concern. The revised bylaws were presented to the community in November and approved by an 84% vote. Meanwhile, the settlement money from the HOA arrived in my account. After paying Marcus his fees, I netted about $37,000. I used some of it to make improvements to my primary residence, and I donated $10,000 to the community center for renovations. As for the pink house, I had a decision to make. I could repaint it now that the lawsuit was settled, or I could keep it as a monument to the absurdity of the situation. I decided to compromise. I hired Bright Future Painting again, and Tommy showed up with his crew in early December. "Please tell me you're repainting this thing," he said. "My eyes hurt every time I drive past it." "I am, but I need you to do something special first." I had him paint a message on the front of the house in large black letters before they painted over it with a new color. The message read, "This house was painted pink to protest HOA overreach. Remember that rules should serve the community, not control it." I took photos of the message, posted them on social media, and they went viral locally. A Denver news station even did a story about it, interviewing me, Linda, and several other homeowners about HOA reform. Then we painted the house a nice sage green that actually looked beautiful with the surrounding landscape. It was on the newly approved color list, and even Gerald Morrison admitted it looked nice, though he wouldn't say so to my face. I rented the house to a lovely couple in their 30s, Mark and Susan, who thought the whole story was hilarious and didn't mind living in the former pink house, now green. Life in Meadowbrook Hills changed after that. Linda Sorensen was a genuinely good HOA president who actually cared about the community rather than control. She organized neighborhood events, a book club, and a community garden. She enforced rules fairly and consistently. When violations occurred, she approached homeowners with offers to help rather than threats of fines. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased, which surprised Gerald Morrison but didn't surprise Linda or me. Turns out people are willing to pay more to live in a community where they feel respected. Karen Fitzgerald, for her part, disappeared from our lives. I heard through mutual contacts that she had tried to get involved in her new HOA in Scottsdale, but was denied a board position after they did a background check and discovered the lawsuit settlement. Apparently, word travels fast in HOA circles. The following spring, I was in my backyard doing some gardening when Linda stopped by. She had become a good friend over the past months. "Sam, I wanted to show you something," she said, pulling out her phone. "Do you remember Helen Carter, the woman who spoke up at the election meeting?" Of course. She was brave to share her story. "She just sent me this." Linda showed me a photo of Helen's house. She had painted her front door a cheerful yellow color, something that would have been immediately cited under the old regime but was now perfectly acceptable under the revised bylaws. She said she felt free for the first time in years. I smiled. That's what it's all about, isn't it? People should feel free in their own homes. You know, when you first bought Karen's house and painted it pink, I thought you were crazy, but you weren't crazy. You were making a point in the most dramatic way possible. You forced everyone to pay attention to a problem we had been ignoring. I was also being petty and vindictive, I admitted. Let's not pretend I was purely noble in my intentions. Maybe. But sometimes a little pettiness in service of a greater good is okay. That conversation stuck with me. I had acted out of frustration and anger, but the consequences had been unexpectedly positive. The community was better for it. People were happier. Rules were fairer. By the summer of that year, I had settled into a comfortable routine. I worked from home, maintained both of my properties, and actually enjoyed being part of the community. I attended HOA meetings regularly, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I served on the Architectural Review Committee, helping to evaluate requests for home modifications and exceptions. I made sure that every request was evaluated fairly, with actual consideration for the homeowner's needs rather than blind adherence to arbitrary rules. When someone wanted to install solar panels that didn't match the approved aesthetic, I argued that environmental considerations should outweigh cosmetic concerns. When someone wanted to paint their shutters a non-approved color, I pushed for approval because it genuinely looked nice and wasn't harming anyone. I had become the kind of HOA member I had needed when Karen was in charge, someone who advocated for common sense and fairness. One day in July, about a year after I had painted Karen's house pink, I received an unexpected email. It was from Richard Fitzgerald, Karen's husband. Dear Sam, I hope this email finds you well. I wanted to reach out because I feel I owe you an apology. During the time Karen was HOA president, I was often traveling for work and wasn't aware of the extent of her actions toward you and other homeowners. When everything came out during the lawsuit, I was shocked and embarrassed. I want you to know that the situation was a wake-up call for both of us, though Karen might not admit it. She has been in therapy working on issues related to control and anxiety. I'm not making excuses for her behavior, but I wanted you to understand that she's working on herself. I also wanted to thank you, strangely enough. The move to Arizona and the forced reflection on what happened has actually improved our marriage. We're in counseling together, and we're both learning to be better people. I know Karen hurt you and others, and I'm truly sorry. I hope you're doing well in Meadowbrook Hills. Sincerely, Richard. I read the email twice. I hadn't expected an apology, and certainly not from Richard. I thought about how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me was still angry about what Karen had put me through. But a larger part of me recognized that holding on to anger wasn't serving any purpose. I wrote back, Richard, thank you for reaching out. I appreciate the apology, and I'm glad to hear that you and Karen are working on things. I won't pretend that what happened was okay, but I also recognize that people are complex and that everyone has their struggles. I hope therapy is helping Karen, and I hope you're both happy in Arizona. Meadowbrook Hills is doing well. We've made a lot of positive changes to the HOA, and it's become a real community rather than just a set of rules. Take care, Sam. I hit send and felt a weight lift that I hadn't realized I was carrying. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or saying that wrong actions were acceptable, but it does mean releasing the hold that anger has on your life. The rest of that summer passed peacefully. My shed remained beige, but I had planted a beautiful garden around it that made it look much less boring. My mailbox was pristine, not because I was afraid of violations, but because I actually took pride in maintaining my property now that it felt like mine rather than something I was renting from an authoritarian HOA. The pink house, now sage green, was a constant reminder of the whole saga. Mark and Susan, my tenants, had become friends. They hosted a barbecue in August and invited me along with several neighbors. As we stood in the backyard, someone mentioned the pink house incident. "I can't believe you actually did that," Mrs. Patterson said, laughing. "When I first saw it, I thought someone had pranked the neighborhood. Then I found out it was intentional, and I didn't know whether to be horrified or impressed." "I was both," the Johnson kid said. He was home from college for the summer. "My friends thought it was hilarious. They were driving from Denver just to see it." "Do you regret it?" Susan asked me. I thought about it honestly. "No, I mean, it was impulsive and petty and probably not the most mature way to handle things. But it worked. It got people's attention in a way that nothing else would have. Sometimes you need to do something dramatic to force change. Plus, you looked really good in that news interview," Mark added. "Very dignified despite owning a bright pink house." Everyone laughed, and the conversation moved on to other topics. But I stayed thinking about Susan's question for a while. Did I regret it? The answer was complicated. I regretted the conflict and the stress. I regretted that things had to escalate to lawsuits and public confrontation. But I didn't regret standing up for myself. I didn't regret exposing the problems with how the HOA was being run. And I definitely didn't regret the positive changes that had resulted. In September, the HOA held its annual election again. Linda Sorensen ran for a second term unopposed. The meeting was well attended, and the mood was completely different from the previous year. People were engaged, asking questions about community improvements rather than complaining about violations. During the meeting, Linda announced some exciting news. Thanks to proper financial management and increased participation in community events, we have a surplus in the HOA budget this year. The board would like to propose using some of those funds to build a playground in the common area and to start a neighborhood emergency preparedness program. Both proposals were enthusiastically approved. This was what an HOA should be, an organization that improved the community rather than policing it. After the meeting, Gerald Morrison approached me. We had maintained a polite but distant relationship since the election. "Sam, I wanted to say something," he began, looking uncomfortable. "When you first painted that house pink, I thought you were destroying the neighborhood. I was angry and I said some things about you that weren't fair. I've watched over this past year as the community has changed, and I've realized that maybe I was wrong. Not about the pink being ugly, that was definitely ugly." He smiled slightly. "But about what the HOA should be. You were right. We had become too focused on control and not enough on community." I shook his hand. "Gerald, I appreciate that, and for what it's worth, I think your military background and attention to detail have actually been valuable in helping Linda implement some of the new programs. Structure isn't bad. It's just about finding the right balance." He looked surprised and pleased. "I'd like to think I've contributed something positive this year." "You have. The emergency preparedness program was your idea, and it's exactly the kind of thing we should be doing." As I drove home that night, I reflected on how much had changed in 15 months. I had gone from being the new guy who just wanted to be left alone to being an active community member. I had gone from being targeted by my HOA to helping reform it. And I had gone from owning one boring beige shed to owning 2 properties and being part of creating real positive change. The pink house had been a symbol, a protest, a statement. But it had also been a catalyst. It had forced conversations that needed to happen. It had exposed problems that needed to be addressed, and ultimately, it had brought about changes that made everyone's lives better. The following winter was quiet. I spent Christmas with my family in Chicago, where Marcus gave me endless grief about the Pink House incident, which had apparently become legendary in his circles of real estate law. My mother thought the whole thing was hilarious and told everyone at Christmas dinner about her son who bought his HOA president's house just to paint it pink. When I returned to Meadowbrook Hills in January, I found a surprise waiting for me. The community had voted while I was gone to name the new playground Irvine Park in recognition of my contributions to the community reform efforts. I was simultaneously touched and embarrassed. Linda called me right away. "Sam, I hope you don't mind. The vote was unanimous. People wanted to recognize what you did." "I painted a house pink out of spite, Linda. That's hardly park naming worthy. You stood up against injustice. You forced us all to examine how we were treating each other. You were willing to fight when it would have been easier to just move." That's worth recognizing. The playground was completed in March, and there was a small dedication ceremony. It felt surreal to stand there watching children play on swings and slides while a plaque with my name on it was mounted near the entrance. The plaque read, "Irvine Park. Dedicated to Samuel Irvine, whose courage to challenge unfairness led to positive change in our community. May we always remember that rules should serve people, not the other way around." I gave a short speech, keeping it light and focusing on the importance of community involvement and standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Life continued to improve in Meadowbrook Hills. The community garden that Linda had established became incredibly popular, with waiting lists for plots. The emergency preparedness program that Gerald had championed helped several families during a severe snowstorm that winter. The Architectural Review Committee, which I was part of, approved dozens of home improvements that enhanced the neighborhood's appearance while respecting homeowners' individual choices. Property values increased by an average of 8% over the 18 months following the HOA reforms, which vindicated Linda's approach and silenced the critics who claimed that relaxed rules would hurt home values. I continued to maintain both of my properties carefully, not because I was afraid of violations, but because I took pride in them. My beige shed, while still boring, was now surrounded by such a beautiful garden that it actually looked charming. The sage greenhouse was consistently complimented by neighbors and passers-by. Mark and Susan eventually bought a house in the neighborhood, and I sold them the greenhouse at a fair price. They had fallen in love with Meadowbrook Hills and wanted to stay. I made a small profit on the sale, but more importantly, I had helped good people become permanent members of our community. 2 years after the Pink House incident, I was at a coffee shop in Denver when I ran into someone I never expected to see again. Karen Fitzgerald. She was standing in line ahead of me, and I recognized her immediately despite her different hairstyle and more casual clothing. She looked less severe, less angry than I remembered. When she got her coffee and turned around, she saw me. For a moment, we both froze. Then she walked over to my table. "Sam, I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." "Karen, of course I remember. How are you?" "I'm okay. Better than I was. Can I sit down for a moment?" I gestured to the chair across from me, curious and cautious. She sat down, looking nervous. "I'm in Denver for a training session. I'm actually working as a consultant now, helping HOAs avoid the mistakes I made." I must have looked surprised because she gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. "I know, ironic, right? But that's actually why I wanted to talk to you if I ever saw you again. I owed you an apology face to face, not just through Richard. What I did to you was wrong. I was using the HOA rules to bully people, and you weren't even the first or the worst case. You were just the one who finally stood up to me." "I appreciate the apology," I said carefully. "Richard told me he wrote to you. He also told me what you wrote back, about people being complex and having struggles. That was more generous than I deserved." She looked down at her coffee. "I was diagnosed with anxiety and control issues. Therapy has helped me understand that I was using the HOA as a way to feel powerful and in control of something because other parts of my life felt chaotic. That doesn't excuse what I did, but it explains it." "I'm glad you're getting help," I said, and I meant it. The lawsuit, the embarrassment, losing the house in such a public way, it was horrible at the time. But it was also the wake-up call I needed. Richard and I are doing much better now. I've learned to let go of the need to control everything. And working as a consultant, helping other HOAs find balance between rules and community, it feels like a way to make amends. We talked for another 20 minutes. She asked about Meadowbrook Hills, and I told her about the positive changes, Linda's leadership, and how the community had come together. She seemed genuinely happy to hear it. As we were leaving, she said one more thing. "For what it's worth, buying my house and painting it pink was brilliant. It was petty and vindictive, but it was also the only thing that would have worked. I was too entrenched in my ways to change otherwise. So thank you, I guess, for forcing me to face what I had become." I watched her walk away and felt a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. The whole saga had come full circle. 3 years after I first received that violation notice about my forest green shed, I found myself sitting on my back porch on a warm May evening, looking at my still beige but now charming shed, surrounded by flowers and perfectly maintained lawn. I was preparing for an HOA meeting where I would present a proposal for a community scholarship fund for local high school students. My phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Looking forward to your presentation tonight. The board is going to love it." I smiled and finished my coffee. Who would have thought that a dispute over shed colors would lead to this? That being targeted by an overzealous HOA president would result in me becoming deeply involved in community leadership and reform. The journey from receiving that first violation notice to buying Karen's house to painting it neon pink to implementing real positive change had been absurd, stressful, expensive, and occasionally ridiculous. But it had also been worth it, because at the end of the day, communities matter. How we treat each other matters. Standing up against unfairness matters, even when it's uncomfortable or costly or makes you the owner of a temporarily very pink house. That evening's HOA meeting was productive and positive. My scholarship proposal was approved unanimously. Gerald Morrison proposed a neighborhood watch program that was also approved. Linda announced that Meadowbrook Hills had been recognized by the county as an outstanding community organization. As I drove home that night, I passed the house that had once been bright pink, now a lovely sage green, and I couldn't help but laugh. That ridiculous, petty act of painting Karen Fitzgerald's house neon pink had somehow led to all of this. A stronger community, fairer rules, new friendships, and a sense of belonging I hadn't expected when I first moved to Meadowbrook Hills. My beige shed was still boring. My mailbox was still pristine. My house numbers were still regulation size. But now these things felt like my choices, not mandates from an authority figure with a clipboard and too much power. And really, isn't that what home ownership should be about? Having the freedom to make your own choices, within reasonable limits, without fear of harassment or excessive punishment. Having neighbors who care about community rather than just enforcing rules. The pink house had made a statement, but the real victory was what came after. A community that learned to balance structure with freedom, rules with common sense, and authority with respect. As I pulled into my driveway that night, I noticed my grass was getting a little long. I'd mow it tomorrow, not because I was afraid of a violation notice, but because I wanted to. And that made all the difference. The story of how I bought my HOA president's house and painted it neon pink had become local legend, occasionally still referenced in Denver news stories about HOA reform. People used it as an example of creative protest, of standing up against bureaucratic overreach, and sometimes just as a funny story about neighborhood drama. But for me, it was a reminder that sometimes the most absurd actions can lead to the most meaningful results. That standing up for yourself, even in ways that seem petty or vindictive, can create opportunities for real positive change. And that communities are built not just by following rules, but by people willing to question those rules when they stop serving their intended purpose. I never did repaint my original shed anything other than beige. I kept it that way as my own reminder of where this all started, with a simple desire to paint a structure forest green and an HOA president who couldn't let people make their own choices. But next to that beige shed, I built a small greenhouse where I grew vegetables and flowers. I painted the greenhouse a beautiful forest green, finally achieving my original vision, just in a different form. The HOA approved it without question under the revised bylaws. And every time I looked at that forest green greenhouse next to the beige shed, I smiled, remembering the journey from violation notices to pink houses to real community change. Because in the end, this was never really about paint colors or HOA rules. It was about respect, fairness, and the right of people to feel at home in their own homes. And that was worth fighting for, even if it meant temporarily owning the brightest pink house in Colorado.